But first, joining us now on the line is the senator from the state of Florida, Marco Rubio. Senator, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Senator, this is Marie Harf. Thank you, as Guy said, for joining us in what I know is an incredibly busy time for you. Starting off, what is your message for Floridians today? I know you're down there. You've been talking to a lot of the state's residents. What message do you want our listeners to hear tonight from you?
Well, virtually no part of the state is potentially unaffected by the storm. This is an incredibly dangerous storm, and a Category 5 projected to enter Florida, impact Florida, is a very strong Category 4, which is a big, big deal. I mean, these are rare in terms of making landfall somewhere. And just the sheer scope of it. I mean, I encourage people to look at the broader cone, because even if you're not in the eye of that storm, it is such a big storm, and the strong winds extend so far out that virtually, every part of the southern part of the state and moving up into the central part of the state could be impacted. So I think everyone needs to be thinking about it. Obviously, the further south you are, the less time you have. But really, tomorrow is going to be a critical day for people to get their plan in place. If you're in an area where you're being encouraged to evacuate, you should. If you're in an area where you're not being evacuated, you make sure you take care of your home, and also, be prepared to be able to sustain yourself with food, water, medicine for at least 3 days after the storm, and if you can do more, that'd be even better. But I think really the next couple of days are going to be critical, because by sundown Friday, you're not going to want to be outside putting up shutters or anything, especially in the southern part of the state. So people need to act and take it seriously. We can save a lot of lives if we do that now.
That's right, and I know that message is getting put out from you, from Governor Scott and others. In this critical lead-up time before the storm hits Florida, what are the kinds of things that state and local responders are doing to prepare, and what kind of help are you already getting from the federal government to prepare for what could be really catastrophic?
Yeah, we've had great cooperation. I mean, I spoke to the president earlier this afternoon. He called me from Air Force One, pledged his full support. He obviously knows Florida quite well and spends a lot of time here, so he's aware about some of the specific communities that are being impacted. Spoke to the Transportation Secretary, the Director of FEMA, Small Business Administration. I mean, just incredible cooperation. The military has begun to pre-position assets offshore, amphibious ships and the like, who could quickly respond and provide assistance if the roads are blocked and you can't get aid in, critical aid like medicine and things of this nature, generators for hospitals, things of that nature at the federal level. FEMA has pre-positioned assets and is prepared to come in with those sorts of things as soon as it's safe to do so. So all these things are important. And then obviously at the local and state level, I mean, they run point on this, and in Florida they're very experienced, whether it's opening up shelters for mandatory or suggested evacuations, whether it's ensuring that all of the critical infrastructure is protected so that you can respond to people quickly. So Florida's been through a lot of these, unfortunately, but in terms of preparation, and I don't say this is disrespectful to any other state, I mean, Florida really has, I think, a system that's the best in the world in terms of getting ready.
We're speaking with Senator Marco Rubio of Florida. And, Senator, to talk about politics now for a moment, there were some eyebrows raised, to put it lightly, here in Washington today when the president basically agreed to a proposal from Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi on the debt ceiling and a fiscal deal, pushing some of those issues out just a few months. Republicans were hoping for a much longer time horizon on that. Have you gotten an opportunity to look at that deal, and what do you make of it? Is it something that you're willing to potentially support?
Well, first, a couple things. I am aware of it, obviously, because some of the news reports. I haven't been in Washington today, and just looking at airline schedules and the like, I mean, it's very difficult for me to kind of get over there and get back. And also, I mean, I don't just represent Florida. I happen to live in the city, my home, my family. Got to get them ready. But I am aware of it from the press reports. Look, I don't like the debt limit. I'm not in favor of CRs and things of that nature. I do think that. And I haven't had a chance to speak to the president about it, but there's a combination of factors at play here all at once that may have led him to make that decision. We've got one storm behind us that we're recovering from, another massive storm that's already hit the Virgin Islands, is about to hit Puerto Rico, could impact the state of Florida. So you've got North Korea, you've got a series of events that are kind of all piling up. And it sounds like the president made a pragmatic decision here to kind of get some things off the plate until December so we could focus on some of these other things and get relief, not just for Harvey, but potentially money into the hands of FEMA, who runs out of money on Friday, by the way, if that doesn't happen. So obviously I look forward to talking to him a little bit more about the thinking that went into it. I am generally I've never supported a debt limit increase without fiscal restraint. And about the only good news in this whole endeavor is that it does provide funding for FEMA and it does those sorts of things that I've talked about until December, which hopefully gives us time to go back and do it the right way.
On another hot topic this week, you were quoted as saying on the DACA decision by the White House that you really wanted additional guidance from the president and from the White House for Congress to say, all right, if this is now our responsibility and our charge, which it should be under the Constitution to make laws, what is the type of bill that the president is willing to sign? The first question, Senator, is have you gotten any of that guidance from the White House yet? And the second question is, what kind of bill are you willing to support?
Well, a couple things. Number one, this notion that DACA was going to get thrown out by a court in all likelihood because it was unconstitutional, and they would have thrown it out potentially without any transitional period of 6 months and so forth. So in essence, I don't think the president did anything that wouldn't ultimately have happened anyway. I think it's pretty clear the combination of his statements afterwards, his statements before, and the 6-month transitional period that the president wants Congress to send him something that he can sign. I'm not asking the president to draft a bill. I think that's Congress's job to draft one and to pass it. But it is important to know what the president is willing to support and what he's not. What are the red lines? What are some things that go too far? Because that creates the playing field under which we can operate. In essence, we don't have, if you truly want to do something to kind of help bridge this gap that exists between what's in place now and what should be done appropriately, you don't want to waste any time pursuing legislation that he can't sign and, conversely, that can't pass. So, I still think there's a broad commitment in this country to the idea that if you came here as a very young child and have grown up in our system, gone to our schools, are gainfully employed, basically Americanized in every way except document, I think the vast majority of Americans support. And I don't speak for the president, but it's my feeling that the president himself would like to see something positive happen in that regard. But it's got to be done in a way that obviously doesn't encourage people to do this in the future, in a way that's fair to people that are trying to come here legally, but also in a way that truly embodies the compassion that our country's been known for. This is an issue that we would do because it's in our national interest and because it furthers our heritage as a nation of compassion. So I think people need to be reasonable about it and how to get something done. I hope that the Democrats don't overreach on this and try to make it more than what it should be. I hope members of my own party will work with the White House to get something positive done on this, because it seems every indication I've seen from his public statements and my conversations with him in the past, I think this is a problem the president would like to solve in a way that's constitutional.
And just to put a finer point on this, a lot of conservatives are saying if you're going to pass a DREAM Act and codify it the right way, there has to be some border enforcement or immigration enforcement component of that compromise. The Democrats and Chuck Schumer saying, no, we want standalone, just a clean DREAM Act bill. From your perspective, Senator, would you or will you rule out voting for just a clean DREAM Act, or is that something you would consider?
Well, I'm not in a position yet to rule anything out or rule anything in. I mean, we obviously need to see where the votes are, and we need to talk to the White House and get some guidance from them about whether that is a priority that they want to see before something like this is passed. Because, again, with a 6-month period in place, we don't have a lot of time for delay here, to wasting time on something that doesn't have a chance to pass or that the president's not going to sign. That said, irrespective of this issue with DACA, the border security is a fundamental obligation of the federal government. We should be doing that irrespective of this issue. And that's something we should be working on already. In essence, to me, that is something you do no matter what, even if we didn't have a DACA problem. Every country in the world, every sovereign country has a right to have immigration laws and has a right to enforce them. That's a fundamental obligation of the federal government.
Last question, Senator Rubio. There have been reports in the last few weeks of attacks against our diplomats in Havana attributed to the regime down there. You've, of course, been a very harsh critic of the shift in U.S. policy under the Obama administration. You were pleased that President Trump rolled some of that back. What is your reaction to these alleged attacks against U.S. personnel in the Cuban capital?
Yeah, I have two reactions. The first is the Cuban government is 100% responsible, whether they conducted the attacks or not. And I'm not right now in a position to opine on that and, on a radio show and so forth. But I can tell you that whether they conduct it or not is irrelevant. They are responsible for the safety and security of all diplomats in that country. And that is one of the most tightly controlled societies on the planet. The notion that somehow someone could have done this, a very sophisticated attack against U.S. diplomats and the Cuban government not know about it, is far-fetched. And my other observation is these things didn't happen in the last few weeks. These things happened near the tail end of the Obama administration, after the opening to Cuba, after
Right.
the trumpeted, we have a better relationship with them. So it just shows you that our policy towards Cuba may have changed, but the Cuban government's attitude towards the United States has not. And this probably goes further than anything we'd seen against Americans working in Cuba in a long time. And so think about that. Obama does this opening. They open this embassy. They do this big, fanfare around the opening or reopening of an embassy. And then 16 people get seriously harmed in Cuba. So it just tells you everything you need to know. Sadly, for those of us who are Cuba observers, it's not surprising. And I think what's really shocking is that it didn't come to light earlier under the Obama administration, who should have perhaps taken steps against Cuba with regards to these attacks.
I mean, do you feel vindicated about sort of the fundamental nature of the Castro regime? Because a lot of people said, and I was sympathetic to the argument, this policy hasn't really worked, let's try something new. And you said, no, these are really bad, evil people. Do you kind of feel like, even though you knew this was the case, this might be eye-opening for other folks?
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm not against any changes to Cuba policy. If you see what the president did, which we supported very strongly, it was a targeted thing. I mean, he kept some things in place that made sense and changed some things that didn't. It was a targeted change designed to strengthen the Cuban people, not the Cuban regime. As far as vindicated is concerned, I guess you could put it that way. I wish it hadn't happened, to be honest with you, but I'm not surprised by it. Anybody who knows the nature of this regime would say these are the kinds of things they do. They do it to their own people. Why wouldn't they do it to Americans?
Senator, thank you so much for joining us on Fox News Radio during what I know is an incredibly tough time for your state. Our thoughts and prayers are with you and your family and everyone in Florida as you weather what I know will be a tough few days and weeks ahead. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.